Hi, everyone. I am really honored to talk to our guest today. Arno is the founder of the Warrior's Way mental training method and has been climbing since 1973. He's seen the sport evolve from only trad climbing to the multidisciplinary sport it is today. And Arno has written 2 books to help rock climbers with their mental training and is now working on offering his mental training beyond the world of rock climbing. No. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. I am really happy to have you on as our very first guest, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time to our audience for the bumps in the road I'm sure to hit as a first-time podcast host.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Leslie. Nice
Of
to be
course.
here.
Yeah, the reason I reached out to you to talk is because you do something really interesting in your work. You combine rock climbing and martial arts philosophy, both of which I love. And to be honest, I can sometimes be a harsh critic when it comes to these types of books because I've been reading them since I was a little kid and built my life around many of these principles. But for the listeners in our audience who may not already know about your work, can you tell us about what you've created?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Um, I started climbing, like you said, 1973, and let's see, in the mid 90s, I was looking for a way to create a career in climbing, like some way that I felt I could give back to climbing because it's been a discipline that has been really meaningful for me to kind of center my life, to give my life meaning, beyond just going through the activities that we feel we need to. And so mental training was interesting to me. And so starting to investigate it more, I really found that I enjoyed studying about mental training as much as I enjoyed climbing. So it's a great fit. The thing is, though, it's like in the mid 90s, there was almost no information about mental training for climbing. And so I kind of had to start from scratch, like really research widely. And after about 5 years, I actually started in 1990, and 95 is when I made a decision to start teaching it, experimenting. But I had like 5 years of study where I was, really researching broadly, and I came up with like 7 principles that seemed important to teach, because each principle kind of had a positive and a negative, you might say, like a negative quality, you're limited in how you use your mind or how you live your life. The positive quality of that enhances how you live your life and how you use your mind. So a simple example is accepting responsibility. It's like one of the 7 principles. If we don't accept responsibility, then we really kind of lose our ability to be able to act effectively in the challenges that come up. If we do accept responsibility, then that's a first step for being able to take effective action. So at the time in the mid 90s, I identified those 7 principles, but I really had no idea how to teach them. So it was like about maybe 7 years of intense exploration, teaching, getting feedback from students until I could understand it better and be able to publish it in the Rock Warriors Way book.
That's amazing. One thing I'm just curious about is how you came to start studying the warrior philosophies, because I remember martial arts in the 90s, and I agree with you, there wasn't a ton of literature out there. There were maybe a few translations of the old books, but there weren't like a huge number of practitioners in the US. So how did you come across that knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point, like the warrior tradition. Like, why would we even have that as part of a mental training program? Uh, there are kind of 2 reasons for why I was drawn in that direction. One is I'm a veteran, and having experienced experiences in the military, you learn more about what it means to be a warrior, like to move toward threats, to protect society. With threats are really just stressors and challenges. And so having and some understanding of that warrior mentality in the military seemed like helpful and effective. But additionally, I was reading the books of Carlos Castaneda, okay, who, was working on his graduate program there at UCLA, where you are. And so when he was having these different adventures with his Yaqui Indian sorcerer, Don Juan Matus in Mexico in the Sonoran Desert, Don Juan was teaching him about what it meant to be a warrior in a different context, not just like a military context. And I found that really appealing because there's a lot of misconceptions around what the warrior's way understands as what it means to be a warrior. Like, what is the way that we are warriors when we're working on mental training? And it's not like like an overly aggressive, violent kind of confrontation with life. It's not like that. It's more a way of using your attention in such a way that you can effectively process yourself and even integrate yourself with the stressors that you're engaged in. For example, if you're having a conversation that's a struggle, or if there's a certain disagreement, a conflict, you find a way to understand the other person's perspective and also share your own perspective so that the two perspectives can come together into a better understanding than either of you had individually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it's just an amazing insight to have, and it sounds like what you learned by reading these books is almost exactly the same thing I learned in my journey through martial arts was, being a warrior, being being a warrior is not about fighting. It's not about overpowering someone else or being more dominant or anything like that. There was a word that was used in my martial arts practice called tatsujin, which just means complete human being. And the ultimate goal of practicing and, becoming, stronger and becoming more effective was really just to kind of allow yourself to be a complete and full human being. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea. And it sounds like, through your learning and reading and observations, you've kind of come to the same conclusion. And I find that to be so heartening because I feel like that is like a bit of a natural tendency for people who are introspective. Like, we want to just learn how to make our lives more complete. How do we become more full human beings? And I think the warrior tradition is certainly a great way to get there. And it's also just the reason why I love it personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
let me just comment on that a little bit because it's really
yeah.
an important point, I think. We want to feel capable in our lives, right? Like that we have some power to act decisively, to move our lives in the directions that are meaningful to us. So when we have this concept of a warrior, it's like it's someone that is able to show up and be a full human being, to be present for the inevitable stressors and act decisively in them with the environment. I mean, even in climbing, if we're fighting against the climb, then we're going to diminish our effectiveness, and we're not going to have as much joy and fun in the experience. Climbing is a lot about blending with the rock, like moving our body in an efficient way so that we can kind of blend with what the climb is requiring of us, what it's offering up as far as its easiest way through the difficulty. So this concept of being a warrior is a way that we want to be able to show up more completely for whatever the stressors are that we're encountering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just kind of to go off of what you said about almost forming to the rock, I think that being a warrior, like a big part of it is learning how to be more fluid and see yourself in many different lights and see the different possibilities that you can be in a situation, and just not being rigid and saying, you know, this has to go this one way, it has to be my way. I think a big part of that is just saying, like, what do I need to be in order to get through this challenge?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, an important part of the warrior's way is the learning process. Like if to to become more complete mentally, we need to focus on learning. That's why we go to university and get educations. Um, but the learning process is being able to integrate new information. If we're just want things to be our way, then we're operating from a perspective of what I know right now, not what learning is going to teach me, as I step through this challenging situation. So uh, it is very much of being able to be open to new information, but also to even challenge what we think we currently know, because some of it is going to be wrong.
Right, right.
Mhm.
I think there's such an interesting relationship between performance, fear, and knowledge. I know just in my own climbing and also just in being in business, a lot of times I was afraid of challenging myself because of just a lack of knowledge. But I would make up all of these excuses for myself saying, oh, that's not something I want to do. That's not where I want to go. And one experience that comes to mind is when I started learning how to trad climb, because I started first with bouldering and then sport climbing and then trad climbing, which is the opposite, I think, of how climbers used to operate.
Yeah.
But when I first started, you know, even moving from bouldering to sport climbing, I was like, oh, there's so much gear involved. There are just so many things that I need to know. I don't think I want to do this. I don't like this. And once I started learning more and became more competent at rope management and clipping bolts and just understanding how quick draws work and stuff like that, I actually really began to love it. And it was the same with trad climbing as well. But in
Mhm.
order to really enjoy it, I had to understand how to build systems, how to make safe systems, and also how to choose my partners wisely, because you can't just go trad climbing, especially like with anyone. And I think that those things kind of taught me a lot about what it means to be afraid, what it means to shy away from situations, and even just be a person that says, oh, I don't like that, I don't want to do that.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
each one of those increments from bouldering to sport climbing to trad climbing, each one has some new elements that need to learn, systems and so forth. But you took it incrementally. Like you had developed a certain foundation for understanding climbing movement and bouldering, and then you add in ropes and quick draws and belayers in sport climbing, so you understand that aspect of it. And then you have another increment where, well, the protection you're putting in now is different. You're putting it in the rock. You need to make sure it's secure. So that's such an important aspect of the learning process. It needs to be incremental like that, because we really can't learn effectively if we just take in a lot of information. We have to integrate it through experience to actually know it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that as well. You really have to internalize what you know. And there was a
Mhm.
phrase that was often used in my martial arts training, which was to understand the feeling. And you
Mhm.
could memorize all of the techniques in the world. You could know an entire library of things intellectually, but if you didn't understand the feeling, then you didn't really quite know it. And
Mhm.
I definitely felt the same way in climbing. Um, there was a quote that I really loved from your book, The Rock Warrior's Way, and it was, It's our responsibility to create our life's work in something we are passionate about because it is the most effective way we can create happiness in our life. And I see the ways in which you help climbers, not just with their climbing performance, but by giving them the tools to navigate, any situation in life. And I imagine that's really fulfilling. And I just want to know a little bit more about, like, was it difficult for you to get to where you are today with your program? I'd just love to hear more about your journey with the Warriors Way.
Yeah, one thing I'm really fortunate to, the position I'm in is really fortunate. I'm, studying something that I'm interested in, mental training in the context of climbing, two things that I love. And the mental training itself helps me understand myself better. So I get to do this, with at the same time learning more, like doing personal work, on myself. I need to do that because, I need to walk my talk, right? I need to do these things and experience them before I can really know them and teach them to other people. Uh, it's been, a long journey, like 30 years now, kind of, from when I first started investigating it. And, you dig up some really things you don't really like very much, along the way, if you're doing this kind of mental training and inquiry work. And so one of the main things I think that mental training can reveal, that it did for me, is our sense of self, our ego, how what kind of self-image we create, and excuse me, the kind of self-worth that we assign to who we think we are. So like
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about being like a full human being, more authentically who you are. The ego tends to be a construct. I'm based on like external things that we achieve or have. We get a sense of importance based on those things instead of more an internal understanding of who we are, which mental training is about digging inside of ourselves, not to look outside of ourselves for that understanding. So for my journey, it's really revealed that, wow, Arno, you've got an ego that is kind of tied to your skill of being able to deal with fear. Like I was kind of known for that, for some routes that I put up. And I really saw the limitation of that, because in a lot of ways, it was something that came easy to me. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like something I said, oh, I need to really practice this really well. And I did practice this really well. And now I was able to do this on these climbs. It was more just, I fell into that because it was natural and easier for me. What was harder was getting on more difficult climbs where falling was not an issue.
Hmm.
So this, uh, the journey of mental training for me and for anyone that really digs into it, it reveals things like this, like how we're thinking in a way that is really maybe the opposite of how reality is.
Hmm. I think that's so interesting that it came naturally to you to get on climbs that other people maybe thought were really scary. And in some way, perhaps a bit of your identity was defined by that. I see that a
Mhm.
lot, especially in climbers. And I know I experienced that myself when I would get on some climbs and be like, oh, I can't believe I can't do this. I'm supposed to be a person who can climb this grade. And it would just lead to a really negative loop, and I wouldn't enjoy myself that day. And I think there is a really interesting relationship between performance and self-worth. I think it's really unfortunate that the world we live in now and the society we've constructed is um, yeah, it's really reliant on performance and, some kind of external identity in order to inform self-worth. And it's really hard to find, just people and ways of thinking that talk about self-worth in a different way. And I appreciate that you kind of talk about that in your book and try to sort of pull apart climbing performance and self-worth and just go into the idea that, you know, you're not really defined by your climbing performance. It has no bearing on your worth as a human being. Like, our worth as a human being is essentially just the fact that we're a human being and we exist here on this earth. And I think that's just a really important thing for all people to remember. And I just think that you kind of nailed it in the book, and love that you did it in the way that you did.
Yeah, I mean, there was like the key thing that you're bringing up is our sense of identity. You know, like we can ask, like, who am I? Like, like, if we never ask questions around that, then we go through life sort of like making unconscious associations with that create our identity that we never challenge. Like if I say, well, who am I? You know, known for dealing with fear of Dundee's. I'm a climber. You know, we have all of these external representations about who we think we are, and then we assign our importance to that and our worth. But but really, on if we start digging in, we start realizing that there's, you know, life energy. There's awareness that is permeating all of this physical manifestation that we call our body, and what we can easily perceive on a material level. So a really important practice in mental training, I think, is to start kind of separating our identity from the outcomes that we're creating. You know, so that we're not like feeling good about ourselves if we're succeeding or bad about ourselves if we're failing. We're seeing that we're creating an outcome, behaved in a certain way, exerted a certain amount of effort, and it created this outcome. Okay, now let me look at that and see what contributed to that. Some things I did well, other things you know, I can improve on to be able to perform better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't think we can get away from having an identity, but we just need to kind of challenge how we'll have a tendency to unconsciously make associations to get us to create it. And
Yeah.
so, you know, separating identity from outcome is an important part of digging into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's just such an interesting point to make. And yeah, I totally agree with you that our identity really shouldn't be, it really shouldn't be dictated by our performance. Or, I mean, I guess to some extent we need to think about the things that we do as just actions we take and not reflections of ourselves. You can say, you know, these are the 5 steps that I took to gain this better outcome, and just kind of store it in your library instead of saying, oh, I'm a great climber for having done, you know, this thing or that
Mhm.
thing. Yeah. Um, I
There's a
don't
real
know.
practical reason for that too.
Mm,
You know, like we could get off into the philosophy and have a great discussion about it. At the same time, there's from a mental training perspective, there's a very practical reason for separating identity from outcome, and it is because when we make those associations, our we start valuing the identity in that way, and then it's going to distract our attention when we need to be exerting effort, you know, when it's starting to get hard for us. You know, like we're climbing, we're getting more and more tired, maybe and pumped, and we start fearing that we're not going to live up to this identity that is important to us. You know, so at a practical level, it's simply a distraction of attention.
mm,
Uh, but and so um, in other words, it diminishes performance.
Right.
And then, philosophically and just digging into it more, we can start changing how we understand ourselves um, and just look at our effort and our behavior as something that we can examine and change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that type of mentality also of tying your identity to the accomplishment of a route. A friend of mine uses a term that I think is hilarious called summit fever. And I feel like that leads to a lot of accidents and increases your risk because, you may be in a position where you need to bail, but instead of taking the right action and being able to see your situation more clearly, you think more about your ego and you say, oh, I'm a person who must finish this route, and you might push yourself beyond your limits, and that could lead to an accident and possibly even death. And I think that it's just really important to remember that your identity is
Mhm.
actually not tied to accomplishing some route or climbing some mountain. You
Mhm.
can just be who you are without those things too. They might just be, perhaps decoration.
Yeah, I mean, you know, our attention will go toward what we value and how we're motivated. Okay, our attention goes in that direction. So if we have this ego identity that is values achieving end results, feels important and validated when we achieve those end results, it's just like you're saying, our attention will cause us to keep going when the risk is not appropriate. So it
Mm,
actually leads toward taking inappropriate risks. So the mental training, it needs to reveal this tendency, like what do you value? How are you motivated? How is that impacting your attention? Because we want to go climbing. We all love climbing, right? Uh, and we want to enjoy it and make sure we can go again tomorrow. So we're not today. We're not making a poor choice that can cause an injury or worse, and diminish our ability to enjoy this great sport, for long term.
that's super interesting. It's actually just reminds me of one of the first things I learned from doing martial arts, or a real martial art, I would say. And
Mhm.
they really taught us that you didn't have to win the fight. You didn't have to overpower the opponent. What you really were trying to do was to just live to live another day, not even really to fight another day. But if you could make
Mhm.
it out of a terrible situation into tomorrow, then that should be your victory. And that should be
Mhm.
the best possible outcome you could hope for. And it was just such a different mentality from the competition culture that I came from, where it was
Mhm.
like, get points. All you have to do is, get more points than your opponent. And it didn't even really matter if you had survived until tomorrow or anything like that. So I really do see the similarities between how you look at rock climbing, which is in a lot of ways life-threatening, and just the idea of staying alive, which I believe is the art of martial arts. They are both survival arts.
Yeah, like engage in the martial art or the climbing in a way that will more likely to be able to come again tomorrow or have another day, and so, but then how do we do that? Like, well, it has everything to do with attention and awareness of the limiting tendencies of the mind, right? We can, the focus isn't on winning today, it's on sort of fighting our best fight, so to speak. And that doesn't mean like uh, overpowering an opponent. We're looking, the way we're looking at it is to trust in how life is unfolding, how that event is unfolding. And so when we approach it in that perspective and we're focusing moment to moment on what is actually occurring, not what we wish would be occurring, like winning, then we're going to be more likely to survive and even thrive in that situation for having another day.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it, to just notice what is unfolding in front of you versus wishing for any particular outcome. And
Mhm.
I love that so much, and I couldn't agree more. I just think
Yeah.
it's such a lovely way to put it.
It is.
Uh,
It's like um, there are two things that are important here, though, for that. One is we do set goals. Like goals are important. Like even going climbing, we have to choose that route or that route, a certain grade. And so the goal gives us direction. It gives us inspiration, right? It gives us a vision for where we want to take our climbing or where we want to take our lives. And then when we're engaged in it, we do need to trust in how it's unfolding and do that work, do the climbing, go through that experience for its own sake.
mm,
Okay. So they both can work together in a complementary way. It's not like an either or choice, which I think people can misunderstand mental training in that way.
hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It kind of I feel like I encounter this a lot in my life where I make a plan for the future or, I make some kind of roadmap, but I also need to remind myself that this plan, this roadmap can be thrown out at any time, that depending on what occurs in front of you, you might have to write a totally new one. And I feel like I've come to a point in my life where there's less well, there's just sort of like vague roadmap planning, but for the most part, I have had to just trust my intuition and my creativity to get me through a situation versus like writing out all the steps beforehand, like trying to learn all the beta before I get to a climb, because you never know, the
Yeah.
weather might turn and you may not even be able to climb that climb. You might have to use your skills on a totally different climb that you have no knowledge about, and then you'll be in a dangerous place because you'll be, oh no, I didn't study that climb, I don't know where to build my belay pitches. But
Mhm.
it's a much better skill to learn to just do things safely in the process. And I think that really just requires learning your fundamentals, just inside and out, just knowing how to operate under pressure and kind of just trust that what you know will get you through.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing kind of on-siting, right? In life, like we're on-siting a lot. You create a plan, but how can you know if that plan is accurate until you take the steps and execute it, right? You
Mm,
don't. So you might have to modify it at a minimum, or let's say you will have to modify it at a minimum. At the maximum, you might have to, like you say, throw it out and write a whole completely different one. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that we're a failure. It just means that we're adaptable and can, um, in a sense, unfold with how the situation is changing. Because when you start engaging that plan that you wrote out, you're putting it into action, right? And that's when you're realizing what is real, not what you thought was real beforehand. And the same thing happens in climbing. We can be at a stance, on sighting. We're looking ahead. Yeah, we're looking for the easiest way through there, but we haven't been on it yet. We're
mm,
relying on past knowledge, which is helpful, but we're going to at least have to modify what we think we're going to need to do in that on-site situation compared to what we thought our plan was.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that a lot of our culture just has us relying a lot on past knowledge and not really considering the present situation and how we can use that to better our future. And I think just what I love about any of these philosophies and climbing in general, because it gives us the um, how do you say it gives us the opportunity to test what we know. I think that those are just such valuable things to have in our lives, and that's I believe, why I just fell in love with climbing so much, because it became like a testing ground where you could really see, hey, does what I know actually work? Is the way that I'm thinking going to get me through? Am I going to have a positive outcome? And yeah, I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, but you know, climbing in general was just a beautiful thing for me in that way, because it just gave me that place to test myself. And I think a lot of other climbers, you know, they see it the same way as well.
Now, I mean, climbing, uh, a lot of outdoor sports, you know, can be vehicles for experiencing, you know, how life works or how an activity works, and then make parallels to life. You know, climbing is interesting in that, you know, you're going against gravity, so it's has a little bit uh, more accurate, maybe, representation of how life is, because you know every inch or so of effort, you know, against gravity, that's something very tangible has to be done with how you're utilizing your body and mind and how you integrate it with the rock, you know, to make that progress. And it's a partnership too, you know, at least in rope climbing, you know, so how you're communicating with your belayer, how they support you, uh, all the kind of risk decisions that you make, uh, every one of those decisions is a little bit different, and it kind of reveals these tendencies that we'll have, positive and negative, that can we can directly reflect on how we might be doing the same thing in other aspects of our lives, other challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Just
Mhm.
a funny experience that I went through was when I first started rope climbing, I would just climb with anyone and everyone who invited me. And I learned, you know, maybe after a year or so, that that wasn't a great idea, because I was having these precarious situations with people that I didn't know very well. And I just remember thinking, you know what, there's only really 3 people that I like climbing with. And I had to start cutting people out of my, you know, kind of climbing roster, because, well, for one, I was stretched too thin just going out climbing all the time. And I loved it and I wanted to, but at the same time, I really had to tone it back so that I could, you know, well, for one, think about my safety and enjoyment, because there are some people you can go climbing with and they're not actually enjoyable to spend the day with. I just
Really?
remember going through that, being, because yeah, some of us are just like, oh, climbing, it's wonderful, let's go climb with anyone and everyone, and it's so exciting and novel. And then, you know, you have all this drama. And yeah, finally I realized, and I think that's the moment where I was like, maybe I'm just a really salty person, I just only want to climb with these 3 people, and that's fine.
No, I think you're being wise. I mean, you know, we're all on our own mental training journey. Okay. So the belayer down there that you're going climbing with, he or she is on their own mental training journey. So they're going to, let's say, coach you in a way that they maybe want to be coached, or wanting to see you succeed, or playing to your ego, all different ways that are actually could encourage you in the wrong direction. You know,
Mm,
so partnerships are so important, and testing out like how those partners are going to support each other in like helpful ways toward taking appropriate risks, like so important to figure that out, and then say, ah, those 3 people, those are the ones, you know. And then yeah, you don't just go climbing with anyone.
right.
I did that a lot too, you know, in my younger years, and I've been dropped to the ground, you know, all different kinds of things, you know, that I'm not going to go with that person anymore.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, I used to climb with a lot of people who were, they had this mode of encouragement that almost it was in denial of my actual ability level, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you can do that, you totally do that, I've seen you make harder moves than that at the gym, yada yada. And I'm like, well, how many times have we even actually climbed together at the gym? Like, you just have this idea in my head that I'm a strong climber or something. But yeah, and I kind of traded out all of those partners for people who were more maybe intuitive and just allowed me to feel what I was feeling that day. And I think the current partners I have are great because they're encouraging, but if I don't feel up to something, or if I'm having a problem, like a physical problem, they don't try to bump up my ego and say, hey, you're a person who can do that climb. They're just like, oh, having a bad day, like, we'll try this another time. And I love having constructive partners like that. And I feel like that has really enhanced my climbing experience just a lot. And interestingly, my climbing partners, just those particular ones, have also become sort of my most beloved friends in life. And I think that climbing really taught me how to be a better friend and have better relationships with people too.
Absolutely. I mean, and we crave that, right? We crave connection, meaningful connections with people that, and then through experiences, we grow trust, like a trust that connects, the relationship together. Yeah, really important not to undermine that process, and to have the wherewithal, the awareness of, if you're getting yourself into an inappropriate situation, risk, too much risk, and if they're supporting or not. So this is one of the main important things we teach in the training is, as instructors, we're constantly looking for where is the edge of the student's comfort zone. Not where is mine, where is the student's edge? So even in a partnership, the belayer needs to be tuning in to find out, where is Leslie's edge of her comfort zone? And then to find a way to push you gently out of it. So like, can say, well, for example, you might see that you're like stressing, and they can say, okay, breathe, Leslie, calm down, relax. Maybe you need to stop, shake out. And then when you go, they can encourage you to keep breathing, stay relaxed, keep moving. What's next? What do you think you need to do next? Like putting the responsibility on the climber for making his or her own decisions, but just helping the climber stay focused on what they need to stay focused on. So, that's what I think is a better approach for coaching, that the belayer can do for the climber.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks for the tip on just how to be a more supportive belayer. I think that's really important. I mean, sometimes as belayers, we think we're just, a person holding the rope and feeding it out and whatnot. But I think that we can be such a great asset to the climb by just providing our support and our insight, and just letting the climber do their best and facilitating that. As opposed to just sort of like checking out and saying, oh, like, I'm just here holding the rope, or doing the opposite by, being like, rah, rah, you can do it. It's your ego.
Yeah, they're kind of two extremes, kind of, or maybe two tendencies that that are not helpful. Like one is this rah rah, like you can do it, and we're just mindlessly saying it because we want to see the climber succeed, and even if we don't know their true ability or what's appropriate, like we're encouraging them just to keep going. Another is like we can take away the learning opportunity too quickly. Like I've done that before. Like a friend of mine was struggling on a climb, falling and struggling, and I say, well, I can lead it if you can't do it, and which we did. Like he ended up, I lowered him down, I led it, and he followed me. And later he said, if you just let me struggle a little bit longer, I probably would have been able to do it. So in other words, in both the rah keep going, or like I can do it if you can't do it, it's like a mental reaction to seeing someone else struggle. Like we don't like to see other people struggle, so we want to rah get them through the struggle, to where they're through it, or we want to kind of rescue them, bring them down so we can go up. And we like, it's discomfort for ourselves, to see someone else struggling like that. So becoming aware of that, and allowing the climber to be in that discomfort in an appropriate way, encouraging them, to remind them, like, what do you need to be focusing on here? Are you thinking this through? Or are you taking action? And letting them struggle for a while. And then, well, if they want to come down, let that be a decision they're making.
Well, as you were saying that, I just had some thoughts come up of, in what ways I haven't perhaps been a great partner, maybe not just in climbing, but also in life. Like, I think that's just such a good analogy for how we support each other as friends and partners and everything, because I can definitely think of some situations where I've reacted in one way or the other to someone struggling, and it just made me think about, like, oh, maybe I should tune in a little more to how I react to other people's struggles.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? Like, we want them to know that, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here. You're struggling. I'm here. I've got the rope, whatever it is, without taking that struggle away from them. And also kind of gauging, like, well, maybe they're overwhelmed, like in life or in climbing. Then we can find a way to coach them back into a little bit more comfort or less stress, so that they can actually manage that. Because see, the stress, the discomfort, the struggle, that's where the learning occurs. So if we have this natural tendency to not like to see other people struggle, and we're sort of either helping them escape it or rushing them through it, then we're not honoring that struggle and that stressor for them as that learning opportunity that it is, or has the potential to be.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Yeah, it's just amazing, like, how many ways climbing and life just parallel each other. And
Yeah.
I feel like this conversation about belaying has turned into a conversation just about, like, human empathy. And I think stuff like that is incredible.
Yeah. I've been reading more about compassion.
In what way?
Well, in a way that is important for mental training. Like, compassion is like wanting to help someone alleviate their suffering. Like, Kristen Neff has a book called Fierce Self-Compassion. Like, it has like two different qualities to it, like tenderness, like holding ourselves tenderly for mistakes, let's say, that we make, but also having a fierceness to it that is moving us to take some action, because we don't want to just wallow in self-pity. We want to be tender with ourselves for making mistakes that are going to be inevitable, and at the same time have some fierceness to us to learn from that and move forward. So we need to do that with ourselves, and we also, need to do that with others that we're supporting.
Hmm. Have you read a book called, oh my God, the title, the exact configuration of the title is escaping me, but it's Shambhala, the Warrior Tradition by Chogyam Rinpoche Trungpa.
Yeah.
I'm gonna butcher that name, but
Yeah, it's
yeah,
the Sacred Path of the Warrior by
that's what
Chogyam
it is.
Trungpa. Yeah.
Yeah. I've read that book multiple times, and the thing that really sticks with me every time is the way that he talks about tenderness and how that is sort of or should be kind of the default human state. It's not some kind of state of elation or, even, yes, any kind of like self-pitying state that we are trying to be in, but one of tenderness is actually the place of most flexibility and fluidity, and kind of that is the state of the warrior, is to just see the world and be tender with it. And a lot of times it might even bring us a little bit of sadness, but kind of dealing with that and taking action from that place seems to me like the best place we can kind of operate from. Is that something that you have found as well?
Yeah, I mean, a few things come to mind. One is that, scientific research studies that Kristen Neff and Kelly McGonigal have done. They're both researchers. Kelly is at Stanford in California, but actually find that self-compassion is more powerful than self-criticism.
Mm.
Like we think that if we're hard on ourselves, then we're going to be willing to do better in the future. Now, that actually can work, and we talk about, well, if it works, then that must be validation enough to use that kind of technique. But the thing with self-criticism is we hate our life journey. It's like, yeah, you can do better, and you're like hard on yourself, to get to some future time. We're constantly living toward a future we think is better than today.
Mm.
And that future never arrives because we're constantly critical. The ego's never satisfied. So self-compassion helps us, still work through struggles, but have some joy along the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's critically important, right? Why else would we want to live our lives? We don't want to just be happy after we die. We want to be happy along the way and have some joy in it, right? So compassion has that strength,
Yeah.
which is really opposite of what the mind tends to think. We think it's kind of wishy-washy, like you're not, you don't really care about end results and achievement. Just like these scientific studies show, what we think is reality, that you have to be hard on yourself, is actually the opposite is true. And
Mm-hmm.
this happens in climbing also. When a simple example is when we teach falling, we ask the students to look down into the fall zone, and before they do that, they say, wow, that seems like that's going to make me more afraid. I'm already afraid, Arno. Like, why are you asking me to look down and make myself more afraid? When they do it in experience, when they experience it, it has exactly the opposite effect. Because when you look down, sort of facing your fears, focus your attention on what the actual situation is, first of all, you feel like a little more empowered to do something with that situation, but you're also focusing on the real situation instead of your mind's imaginings about it.
Mm. Like you may not be
Like,
that far above your bolt, but you may feel like you're really run out or something. And when you see it, you see how safe it
mm-hmm.
can be. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so everything we teach in the training is like helping students focus their attention on the real situation instead of how their mind is interpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
Because uh, the real situation is what holds the exact risk, for that section of the climb. It's where you're gathering actual information about how difficult it will be and what resources you have to apply to it, as opposed to your imaginings about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a little while ago, you had talked about self-compassion versus self-criticism.
Mhm.
Do you feel like there is also a place for self-grandiosity? And do you see people moving from self-criticism to self-grandiosity? And do you have any tips for kind of finding the balance in between? I don't know if you see this a lot, in climbing, but I do feel like I am observing in the world people who are perhaps naturally self-critical in an effort to no longer be critical end up becoming self-grandiose.
Yeah, I would say let's not find a balance between them. Let's get rid of them.
Mm,
So because they're both structured around this ego identity that we're trying to uphold. Like we might criticize ourselves to sort of like we're saying, um, I don't like my behavior, I can do better, it's to make our ego feel okay, that it's sort of taking some kind of responsibility and action, to deal with errors, mistakes. Uh, but yeah, you can go to the other extreme and just say like, I'm great, and prop our ego up with all kinds of achievements, ignoring the failures, and so I think we just need to move beyond those, and we do that by just not focusing on propping up our identity, separate our identity from what's going on in our climbing, so we can see it more objectively and learn better from the situation and enjoy it better. Like we're not wasting our energy and our attention on propping up some kind of an ego. We're rather finding out what you said, how to be a more full, authentic human being.
I feel like the conversation has just come full circle and we're talking about, kind of the crux of it all, which is separating your self-worth from your identity again. And yeah, I think it's such an important thing to remember. And like, yeah, like you said, it's not about finding a balance between those two extremes. It's sort of just getting rid of the extremes altogether, which super interesting way to look at it, I think.
Yes, we don't need to improve our self-image. We don't need to prove our self-worth. Those are all structured around external representations of how we understand ourselves, like external identity constructions. I'm worthy for existing simply because I'm here. Like I don't have to prove that I'm worthy of existing here. I don't have to improve my self-image. I can focus on learning, enjoy that, uh, and let that be what's driving me.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's great. That's a quotable moment for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, so are there some like lessons that you've learned from just running your program and writing your books? Just for our listeners out there, do you have, one or two sort of major lessons that you have learned from just, becoming who you are today?
Yes, I mean there are some foundational mental training principles that can really help us and the listeners to begin their journeys. And one is you have to want to change. We have to want to start along that journey, and then when we start inquiring into our mental training, our minds, to make sure we're taking daily small steps. Like in order to change behavior, we've got to do a lot of little things over a long period of time. And so I want to do this. That's an important starting point. And then I'm taking this small step today and throughout today. It's not just like once in the morning, and then you're finished. You need to think like, okay, I'm going to observe my thoughts today. I'm going to notice when I have self-critical thoughts. And you just all day long, you're observing self-critical thoughts and you say, okay, I'm going to shift that toward fierce self-compassion. Hold myself tenderly and then fiercely look at what I can do to improve my whatever I was doing in that moment. So it takes that ongoing small steps continuously to improve. And so that would be a really important thing to apply, very tangible to apply.
That's great. Thank you for that. Kind of my last question to you is, you mentioned that you love to read and you read every day. Can you tell me about maybe a couple books that you think have had the most profound effect on your perspective, or that you found really eye-opening in particular?
There's so many. I'd like to think like what could be two or three that would be really accessible for the listeners. I really think that Kelly McGonigal's book called The Willpower Instinct is a really excellent book. Like we all struggle with willpower, like to move forward in a direction that's important and meaningful. And she does a really great job of dissecting all of that and giving some very practical ways of applying it. That would be one. I think another one, since we've been talking about compassion today, Tara Brach's book on radical self-compassion would be another one that would be really accessible and important for the listeners. And then maybe something, a little lighter, like grab a Castaneda book or something from Dan Millman, like The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, read something in the warrior tradition like that to just start investigating what that whole arena is like.
Amazing. I haven't read any of those books, so I'm adding those to my list right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so, tell our listeners where they can find you.
Sure. warriorsway.com is our website. On social media, like Instagram and Twitter, it's at Rock Warriors Way. Facebook, I think it's The Warriors Way. So can reach out there. And we send out like weekly mental training tips to our subscribers. You could get on our email list and kind of every week you got something to work with, which is, like I said, important to do something regularly. And that would be a way that they could do that.
That's great. I'm going to subscribe to your list right now.
Okay.
Thank you so much for talking with me today. I just want to thank you for all the work that you do and the wonderful conversation. And it's really just been an honor to connect with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. And it's like, this podcast opportunity like this is to kind of help spread the word. So thanks for reaching out and asking me to participate.
Yeah, of course. I think, the people who follow us are really going to love what you had to say.
Cool.
Awesome.